Well, Donald Trump's favorite judge, who was appointed by Donald Trump, Judge Aileen Mercedes Cannon, made legal history today. She became the very first judge ever to deny a Trump motion to dismiss criminal charges against Donald Trump and not then be attacked by Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not attack Judge Cannon. Donald Trump did not do a social media post with pictures of Judge Cannon's children, attacking her and her children. Donald Trump did not attack the judge's spouse. Donald Trump did not attack the judge's staff. In fact, Donald Trump praised the judge today who denied his motion to dismiss the charges. Donald Trump posted on social media that special counsel Jack Smith should be sanctioned or censured for the way he is attacking a highly respected Judge Aileen Cannon. Donald Trump knows that Judge Cannon was, in effect, forced by Jack Smith, who cornered her legally in a filing on Tuesday, that in effect forced her to deny Donald Trump's months-old motion to dismiss the case on the grounds that the Presidential Records Act allows Donald Trump to do whatever he wants with classified documents that the FBI found in Donald Trump's possession after serving a search warrant at his Florida residence. Judge Cannon wrote today, the Presidential Records Act does not provide a pretrial basis to dismiss. And the key word there, of course, is pre-trial. Donald Trump knows that Judge Cannon has reserved the right to dismiss the case on that very same basis later in the proceedings, or to issue a jury instruction in the case, which would basically order the jury to find Donald Trump not guilty on the basis of the Presidential Records Act, in anticipation of the possibility that Judge Cannon might act to dismiss the case on the basis of the Presidential Records Act, or issue jury instructions to the jury ordering them to find Donald Trump not guilty. Special Prosecutor Jack Smith asked Judge Cannon to deliver a final ruling on the issue now so that he can immediately appeal such a ruling to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which has already reversed Judge Cannon dramatically in this case twice. Jack Smith wrote, if the court concludes that a president has carte blanche to remove any document from the White House at the end of his presidency, that any document so removed must be treated as a personal record under the Presidential Records Act as an unreviewable matter of law, and that also, as a matter of law, a former president is forever authorized to possess such a document, regardless of how highly classified it may be and how it is stored. That would constitute a clearly erroneous jury instruction that entails a high probability of failure of a prosecution. And the government must be provided with an opportunity to seek prompt appellate review. In her ruling today, after denying Donald Trump a pretrial dismissal of the charges, Judge Cannon said that asking for a ruling now on whether the Presidential Records Act applies in this case would be, quote, unprecedented and unjust.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.